My dream as a kid was to be a footballer. I played almost every day. I was the only person of colour in my team, and it got to a point where I felt like I didn't fit in and I stood out from the rest. During my playing years, there was no one in professional football that looked like me, that had brown skin, especially not a woman. The dream seemed impossible, and so I stopped.
Well done, Rugby! That's it, come on!
Well done, Rugby.
Well done.
The obvious response to these statistics is to ask why. What is the reason for this lack of British Asians in professional football? What are the barriers that are stopping them from making it to the top? Perhaps one of the first things that comes to mind when we think about why there are so few British Asians in football is the lack of parental support. My dad, when he came to this country as an 8-year-old, used to play football in the park and the streets for fun, but it was never thought of as a career option. This was because my family was forced to leave Africa, and the priority when coming to this country was simply to build a secure future. This was the case for a lot of Asian families, and so they pushed their children to become doctors, lawyers, engineers, and so on. Things seem to have changed now, however, as when I was a kid, my dad used to encourage me to play football and took me to my matches and training. So, are parents really the reason why there are so few Asians at the top levels in football? Dr. Daniel Kilvington is a senior lecturer at Leeds Beckett University whose teaching and research specialism explores race, sport and new media. He's carried out a huge amount of research and work into particularly the exclusion of British Asians in football. So I went up to Leeds to speak to him.
There's certain truths to that, and I think that truth around parental support was maybe there for the first generation, so looking at like 1960s, 1970s, for the first generation migrants who came across from the Indian subcontinent. Of course, football is probably not the number one priority, and sport is not the number one priority. It's more about employment, housing, settlement, things like that. But what we've found through the research and through players I've spoken to, through speaking to the parents as well, when we've got the second and third generation, attitudes change, culture changes, and the parental support for me from the players that I've spoken to is there, especially for third generation British Asians. So for people to turn around, outsiders to turn around and say British Asians don't support their children, I don't think that is true.
Do get my generation of parent who are forcing their kids into football, not stopping them. So I think it used to be the case. I don't think that's the case anymore. It will still take another few generations for it to fully kick in, because you've still got the grandparents who are still there saying, oh, you need to put them in education, don't put them in sport, there's no money in sport. So as soon as that last generation goes and our generations become the grandparents, that's it, it's done, that excuse is gone.
Then I think it's because parents were probably not encouraging their children to take up sports, because they wanted the children, typical Asians, to be doctors, to be teachers, to be engineers, to be bankers. Then you know, it was an uphill battle for the children to basically get the parents' sport. However, now I think parents are fully backing the children. They want them to succeed, and just like any other children growing up in this country, they want to offer them sports.
It used to be my mum and dad, probably the same as your mum and dad, 24/7 work. They didn't have time for sport. They got to earn that money to let us to go to university so we can go and play sport, so we have spare money, spare time. Our generation, we're slightly different. We still want to make money, but we're now thinking, okay, that little bit of extra income coming in, we'll spend it on social stuff, we'll spend it on our kids playing football. So it's important, and we must not stop that.
Another assumption that has been made is that British Asians aren't physically fit to be footballers. We're not big enough, we're not fast enough, and we're not strong enough. People adhering to these stereotypes is why many British Asians turn away from football or aren't given a chance at amateur level. When I've asked the question about why Asians don't make it professionally, I've had many tell me, maybe you're just not good enough.
So in terms of physicality, there is zero truth in this. Race is a social construction. There's no biological evidence for difference among racial groups and racial types. And I've played with British Asian players. I've played with a former British Asian professional player, Anwar Uddin, who's 6'2" and built, and I'm white, and he can definitely shrug me off the ball, no problem. So to suggest that British Asians can't build up a physical frame is ridiculous, because there's a lot of players, Danny Bart as well, there's a lot of players there who are playing the game professional, who are very, very physically strong. So we can't categorise and stereotype British Asians as one thing and essentialise to say that they're not strong enough, because that's simply not true.
That is probably the first generation of Asians, so my parents who were born here in the UK, my father was born in the UK, used to play football, but there wasn't much of an awareness in terms of how physically fit you had to be and how strong you had to be to play professional football. And you know, they probably ate a lot of traditional home cooked food in Asian households back then. I think there's a much bigger and a better awareness of people of my generation in terms of the good kind of nutritional foods to eat, what types of food to eat as well, especially if you are training to be an elite or professional performer in whatever sport it is. And Jan Dander for me is a perfect example of that. Obviously he was with West Brom and then Liverpool, now he's with Swansea. And if you look at Jan, he's a tricky winger, a small frame, he's not by any means 6 foot and built. So you know, he's definitely a role model for young Asians who are looking to break into the game here in the UK. And I think it's a bit of a tired excuse now to say that Asians aren't physically strong enough or fit enough to compete with the other boys. I play with many Asian guys myself, and who are all physically very fit, in the gym 4 or 5 times a week, are more than able to hold their own and compete with the other kind of white lads or the black lads.
There's an image that maybe Indians are just not up to it, okay? And I think until we break that mould, I don't think we'll probably see many sort of players breaking in.
Probably one of the biggest issues in society is racism. Racism is everywhere in our day-to-day lives, on the streets, on public transport, at work. Football, being a competitive sport, creates an atmosphere of intense emotion and rivalry, making it a common place for racism to occur. And we see it almost every week on the news that a player has been racially abused after a match. But it doesn't just stop at racism between fans and players. This is just what is easy for us to see. Racism is in football from the top to the bottom. It's institutional and it's a part of the system.
The under 14s to under 15s in London, they get it a lot, and it's really obvious. The referees hear it, the crowd hear it, parents hear it, and the coaches have to make a massive decision. What do they do at that point?
Football at grassroots is still quite predominantly white dominated, and within that you get a lot of banter, you know, the banter type stuff, which is just another code for the word racism. And I've spoken to a lot of players out there who've actually opted away from the game as a result, simply because they were uncomfortable having these jokes labelled at them all the time. And those who have actually gone on to make it have told, who made it at academy level and actually signed pro contracts, they did have to go through that banter type system and basically have thick skin and put your head down and knuckle down and just get on with it. My argument would be that we shouldn't have to just get on with it, and things like that should be challenged and stopped. But that's just endemic within society. I think it's endemic within football, and especially because football is traditionally this working class, masculine or hyper masculine environment.
And the problem is, it is going to happen. That's the problem. We all know it will happen. So that's the part I don't like. I don't like the fact I will have to deal with it. But I think it's one of them ones. I think you've got to be vocal. You've got to speak up there and then. You've got to let everyone know. I don't believe all this stuff when people say, oh, you're blowing the race card, you're doing that. couldn't give a monkeys, and you need more people to back you up. It can't just be a single voice.
Scouts who have no contacts with British Asian communities will think that the parents don't support, or they're not interested, or cricket's the number one sport, or that they're not strong enough and they prefer stick sports. Those are the stereotypes that do exist, and scouts that I've spoken to over the years do adhere to those stereotypes. What that then results in, that's a form of inferential racism, which is almost like a common sense assumption of certain groups of people. That then leads to institutional racism, which is basically the avoidance of British Asians. So there's a lot of British Asian football teams and leagues that do exist in London and also in the north as well. And that's perfectly normal. Geographically, we look at certain communities which are whiter, certain areas are predominantly British Asian. And within those areas you have predominantly British Asian football teams, and because of these stereotypes that exist, the scouts are simply not going to view these areas and not viewing these players. And even though there's many talented players out there, they're slipping through the net. So football has to change. There has to be a dialogue set up between British Asian communities and football clubs and scouting networks if we're actually going to see any change.
The FA woefully, it's a white middle-class male domain, and that has got to change because they have no clue what it's like. I have no clue what it's like to be racially abused or constantly, just feeling out of place or being made to feel out of place. We have no idea, and until you get somebody in there that knows what it's like and the effects, you will still get apologists going, well, it's only a joke, we don't mean it, etc., etc. That will never change unless the regime changes.
So it's not parents and it's not physicality, but racism is injected in football, on the field and in the structures. The very few British Asians that have made it in football have had to fight through and deal with racism. But what is being done about this, and how can we continue to break down this barrier and ensure that more Asians are included in football?
Well, the Arena Rule is a positive action approach. So what it means is that you have to, football clubs where a BAME candidate has applied for a managerial job, at academy level or first team level now in some cases, they have to shortlist at least one BAME candidate. Okay, so it's positive action. Some people have turned around and said that's reverse racism because now black and Asian minority ethnic candidates are getting the jobs. It's not about giving jobs to people based on their skin colour or ethnicity. It's about giving them an opportunity to present themselves at an interview and destabilise those homogenous white networks, which historically there have been. So I actually founded Creating and Developing Coaches, which is a kind of a networking event to bring in black, Asian, minority ethnic aspiring coaches or actually current coaches who want to progress up the ladder, bring them into a football club and invite key stakeholders from that area, from the FA to kick it out to various other opportunities that exist on the doorstep. Have a networking opportunity, learn about the opportunities in your area, use that as a contacts platform, and then build on that. And then if that creates 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 coaches, that therefore creates 50, 60, 70, 80 opportunities for young kids to play football. And the more kids we've got playing football, the more chance we've got of actually getting that player at the top level. But it's a long process. It's a very long process, and a lot of things that need to change in order to get there.
Birmingham is home to a lot of British Asians, and every year they host a tournament exclusively for Asians where teams from across the country of adults and kids come to play together. Now you may think that by having a tournament like this we're excluding ourselves, but really it's encouraging Asians to play football when the footballing world isn't providing us with enough opportunities.
Please say thank you to these guys. They've been working for months to try and pull all this together. And at the same time, the Carlsbad Football Federation guys who've always organised these tournaments, but more so this year when they've actually part-funded this particular tournament. Guru Ravidas Gurdwara, who've funded this particular tournament yet again. Langar from the Guru Harai Gurdwara, West Bromwich, and the Smadik Gurdwara, Guru Nanak Gurdwara. But perhaps you'd like to ask your parents to go along and say to these Gurdwaras, please give us a bit more money, because without it, this doesn't get put together. And it's all a community event. But moving on, please say a big thank you to the referees, to your coaches, to your parents, and to your supporters.
Stuff like this, I was like with the Asian football tournaments, I was always really weary of them because I'm a bit like, only Asian football tournaments doesn't sound like the right thing to do. But when you look at it, it's a good step. It's not the answer, but it's a good step. You've got kids here who wouldn't normally play football. You've got kids here who are really good at football, and you're looking at them going, why have they not made it? Why have they not become academies? And you need to come here and watch them play, and then you realise it's true. They're just as good as the other counterparts, so why haven't they made it?
The problem is not for everybody. The problem is that British Asians specifically face massive exclusion, which statistically they do. And therefore, if there's a major problem, we've got to hit it directly and head on. So to actually do something specifically for British Asians is fantastic.
If they weren't needed, then why would you have them? Why is it packed? Why is there full teams? We're not talking about just kids football here. My boys are in the under 6, the other ones are under 11s, then you've got under 13s, you've got men's team. So those questions are important, these events are important, and eventually we're going to produce that first fully Asian footballer who's going to hit the Premiership, hit the Championship, whatever level it may be, and then everyone's going to start to believe, and then there will be a massive influx. That's how I believe it will happen anyway.
Get to your position, Brian, come on!
British Asians, there's never really been that pinnacle role model. Some people have said to me that maybe we don't have to have a British Asian to specifically be that role model. It could be anybody, Dele Alli or Harry Kane, and they can aspire to be like that if they want. But I think the role model of being a British Asian player is quite powerful because it shows that you can do it as well. And there's that whole phrase which you can't be what you can't see. I think though when we do see a British Asian player playing week in, week out in the Premier League, or playing for England, making their debut, everybody's going to be talking about this. It's going to be a massive news story. And then this might get scouts and coaches and managers to maybe sit up and Asians can and do play football and do have the talent.
We need to get more Asians involved in football and in the spotlight. The more recognition they get, the more young people will follow in their footsteps. The Asian Football Awards and the Asian Sports Lists are events that take place every year that recognise and reward Asians working in football and sports at all levels.
We hosted our first event last year. Obviously it's a very small, kind of unique networking event. I was quite inspired by the Football Blacklist, liked what they stand for, like the whole setup. You know, they reward people from a BAME, black and ethnic minority, so I decided to do the Asian Sports List.
My name is Dharmesh Sheth. I'm very honoured to be hosting this. Sonia, thank you very much. A round of applause for Sonia from the Asian Sports List.
It's getting there, but if you want my honest opinion, we've missed 30 years of some wonderful, wonderful Asian talent, and that's coming from my generation, watching people my age that were fantastic at football. I just don't understand why they never made it. I think it's a lot of different issues and a lot of speculation as well, and I think they give us no choice but to have an event like this to highlight that.
For me, I would like the communities that I come from to aspire not just to be a football player, but to work in football, to be a lawyer in football, to be a doctor in football, to be a chief executive of a football club, to own a football club, because they are the positions of power where we will influence the game. And if we do have issues of underrepresentation, we can't rely on a non-diverse group of people to solve that problem.
Ethnic minority community, black, Asian minority ethnic community are not in the decision-making positions. But it's not that the talent isn't there for coaching, whatever else, or anything else. It is very much that the empathy within these sports organisations, particularly governing bodies of sport, they just don't have the empathy. They don't understand some of the challenges that ethnic minorities might face from religious, culture. So the point I want to get to is that if we don't change the people at the top, everything else isn't actually going to change.
You tick both those boxes, female and from a BAME background. What were the biggest challenges for you being in those roles?
One thing that I noticed was it was harder for me, in my opinion, to get the respect of my peers. So I'm talking about the chief sports writers in my field. I remember going to, and I started off covering Chelsea for the Evening Standard. It was fine initially, but the first time I went to the bowling ground and covered West Ham versus Chelsea, I remember some of the old school West Ham reporters and the way that they looked at me, and they made me feel really unwelcome. Maybe it was just me, but I certainly felt unwelcome there, and that was for the first time where I thought, well, is it because I'm a woman? Is it because I look visibly different to everyone here? So I think the biggest challenge is, getting the respect of everyone there.
I think you've got to really work hard. Us in this room, probably extra hard to get the volunteering, sacrifice your own time, because when you go and turn up at a professional football club, whether we like it or not, because of the way we look and who we are, we have to prove a point straight away. And you certainly get that feeling. So by volunteering, you get that experience, you build your credibility, and then it's about you as a person, you as a coach, and whatever barriers you face, there's people in this room who probably face and we can help each other get through, I think.
A few high-profile incidents in the last year with racism within football. Do you think that this is now a bigger challenge than it ever was? And do you think perhaps when you look at Asian coaches and potential Asian players, they might be put off from coming into the game because they see this? And what would your message to them be?
My message was always going to be what people don't like, you give them a little bit more of it. If they're not enjoying it, then you give them a little bit more. That's the way it works.
Once you've got your award, take it back into your community and show it to everybody. And show it to the young ones. And let them know that they can be part of whatever sport you are part of and they can be successful. Because at the moment we have a massive problem of underrepresentation across our sports. And we all in this room will solve it. So let's come together, support each other and move this thing forward.
From initiatives at the grassroots level to self-organised individual events such as the Asian Sports List, efforts are being made. But if we do want to find that first British Asian footballer at the top level, a lot more needs to be done. Football needs to change to become more inclusive of everyone, and there needs to be less ignorance towards the problem. These kids have the same dream and we need to give them the same opportunity. What do you want to be when you're older?
A football player. A football player. A footballer like David De Gea. A football player. A footballer like Ronaldo. A footballer. Football player. A footballer. A footballer. I want to be a footballer like David De Gea.